What exactly makes a photo good? That is a bit of a complicated question because photography is subjective, and what I think might be good, you might think is crap. And what I think is crap, you might like. In today's video, I'm going to go over the things that I've learned over the years that help me compose what I consider to be a good photograph. See, there's lots of things that go into making a photograph good from a technical perspective, like light, foreground interest, background interest, anything, if you just happen upon an interesting scene. There's a lot of contributing parts that make up a photograph. The first thing I'd recommend is if you're struggling to find some way to photograph a subject, find some foreground interest. For example, this photo, I put this little bush in front of the mountain, and it kind of balances out the photo because balance is a huge contributing factor to this. You have this tiny little bush, this little shrubbery, and this giant, massive mountain in the background. I was lucky enough to take this shot when the sun was setting and the light just happened to be on the mountain. And I don't know what happened, a cloud opened up, something changed, but the sun hit the mountain perfectly. It didn't hit the bush, but the balance between the two shots and the light on the mountain really draws your eye forward into the scene. I'll show you an example of this same sort of setup that didn't work. So for this photo, it's the exact same idea. I put a little shrubbery with some nice color and the mountains in the background. Now the difference here, it was overcast and it was high noon, so the light was just flat and boring. There's no depth to this photo, even though you're looking down this massive valley and you have these amazing mountains in the background. It just doesn't work. Even though the sky is beautiful and it's dark and moody and dramatic, and you have this nice colorful plant here, the picture is just flat. It's boring. There's nothing to it. And I think the main thing is just the fact that there was no light. If I had light in this photo, it would change it dramatically. Like, let's look at the one that I just showed you again. So you don't have light in the foreground, but you have light in the background that's illuminating the mountain, and it makes it look very interesting. And it's the same sort of composition. It's not really changed too much, but you can see the depth in this photo, and it's much more pleasing to the eye. And that's where light comes into it. You don't always have to be chasing light to get a good photograph, but light is a huge, huge contributing factor to any good photograph. For example, I'll show you a couple photographs that have amazing light. So this is actually the first photograph I took of the mountains, and it was actually on a dark, stormy day. But the storm was moving so fast and pushing those clouds that we kept getting bursts of light coming through. And even though this photograph was shot kind of in the afternoon, closer to dinner time, but not golden hour by any means, the light still comes across the mountains and illuminates them, and it looks fantastic. You have this dark foreground, so there's nothing really there to draw your eye in, but the mountain range is all lit up, and the sky really brings your eye down to look at the whole vastness of this amazing landscape. I was just really lucky to find that light, just happened upon it. Also, if you guys like the music in this video, it's from Epidemic Sound. I have an affiliate link in there if you want to sign up for it. That helps out the channel greatly. Do what you will with that information, but if you feel like it, help out the channel, that's cool. Also, subscribe if you're enjoying this sort of content. I'd love to see you guys back here hanging out. Another thing with light is, in the editing process, you can really change those values and make a photo more interesting. Don't be afraid to darken certain parts. Don't be afraid to brighten certain parts, because you can take this, amazing photo because the light is just coming through and it looks so good. But in the editing process, you can actually change it and make it look more interesting. For example, this photo. I love this photo, and I darkened the crap out of it because it was the setting sun, it was setting behind the mountains, but I find it more interesting and more pleasing to the eye that you don't see a lot of the detail in the bottom. Like right here at the bottom, there were a couple house roofs and everything, and they just really detract from the photo, in my opinion. And I wanted them gone. So instead of removing them with generative fill or anything, I just pulled up a gradient layer, darkened it to almost 0, and now you just have the tips of the mountains just slightly illuminated, and this huge open sky just makes the whole mountain range look, I don't know, magical, majestic. I don't know, you decide. But I just think it works so much better than having all those little townhouse roofs down there. That would just really detract from the photo. And now another reason why I'd say you don't always have to chase light is because you can shoot at high noon and you can still get a decent photograph. So for this one, this was an absurdly bright day, but the whole composition of this photo with the really nice clouds in the background, I think really works, and it really balances out the photo. Because again, using that same technique where I'm putting foreground interest as well as a background subject really draws your eye in here. And you have the two cliffs on the side that kind of bring your eye to this giant round boulder. So even though you don't have amazing light, the composition works for this photo. Another example of shooting at high noon and you're struggling to find half decent light or something to illuminate your subject is go to a forest or somewhere where there's, tree cover or buildings, something that creates a break in light. For example, I'll show you this tree that I photographed a couple of years ago. Now, this is a really chaotic shot, but it was so dark and dense in this forest that everything was just pitch black pretty much through my camera. But I came across this one tree with moss growing up the side, and it looked so nice. But that's mainly because beside the tree, there was actually a break and the light was shining down. And this was, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so not ideal light by any means. But since it was broken up, it created such good contrast in the photo that it makes this boring old tree look amazing and magical. See, a lot of the time with trying to find a photo that's going to look interesting is finding a way to balance it out between certain subjects. Play with scale, play with foreground interest, try and find light that creates interesting contrast. Scale is a huge factor in this too, as if you're shooting a big, huge open landscape, it can be amazing. For example, this photo. It's not super interesting by any means, but it is this big, huge glacial valley. But the scale of it is really shown because I took a photo of myself standing in the actual valley, surrounded by this huge wall of mountains. And it really puts into perspective just how large this whole area is. If, I wasn't there or if somebody else wasn't there, it'd just be a valley. It's just kind of, it looks cool, it's pretty, but you don't really understand the scale of the photo and the location. And if you can't find foreground interest or you can't compose a shot in that way, because let's just say you're photographing birds and, you just don't have anything there, or you're just clicking off photos really fast and you can't really take the time to find something because, the bird could fly away or it could move, then try and make it all about that subject. Really focus on why that subject is interesting. I'll show you an example of that. So I got this photo of this robin on my porch, and I originally shot the photo kind of wide so you saw the railing and you saw more of the background. But there's no need for that because the subject is the point of interest. Nobody gives a crap about the railing or the green background. This guy had just puffed up his feathers. It was a little bit of a rainy day, so you got a lot of nice little micro contrast on his feathers, and it looks fantastic. But the original photo is actually more zoomed out, and it's just not nearly as interesting. Also, I'll say that this light was fantastic, and I'll show you an example of this same sort of deal where it doesn't work at all. So we got these little murder chickens on their little nesting perch here. This photo is wide, it's open, there's distracting shrubbery in the side, there's a lot of dead space at the top. Originally when I took this photo, I thought it'd be interesting because you have the branches going over the nest, but really when you first look at it, you can't see that there's a nest there. It just looks like two geese it's just overall an extremely poorly composed photo. It's not interesting. The subjects are the things that are supposed to be interesting, but they are also lost in the whole mess of the sticks and the shrubbery. They kind of blend into it, so there's no separation between that. And separation is super important, because if we go back to that robin, look at the color difference between the robin, the background, and the railing. It sticks out like it was placed there, like it was just meant to be how it was. It's not lost in, there's no color that's mixing with the subject. It stands out perfectly, which is one thing that you really want to get down, is if you can find separation between your subject and your background or whatever, it'll look amazing. Here's another example. This truck is interesting because it kind of tells a story. Like, why is the truck just left there? Why is its windows not smashed? Why is the headlights not smashed? Why does it still have badging? But why is it sinking into the ground in this field that's seemingly in the middle of nowhere? Kind of asks questions. But if I had just taken this photo, zoomed out, just kind of a truck there, you kind of wouldn't really care too much about it. But the subject of this photo is the truck. It's not the surrounding area. But the surrounding area does help tell the story of the truck. And also, with it being so rusted, and the grass and the blue sky, that creates a lot of separation. Even though it is sinking into the ground, you can still see the subject clearly. Ideally, it's not shot in the best light because, it is Saskatchewan. It's mainly flat. There's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of anything to really make this interesting. If I had shot it, at golden hour, it'd be a lot more interesting, a lot more pleasing to the eye, but I couldn't do that. But it is still an interesting photo nonetheless. I think if you can tell a story with a photo, if you can have something there that makes it, makes you question why it's a certain way, I think that's another reason that'll make your photo way more interesting. And sometimes photos can surprise you. Like this photo, for example. I took this the other day with my friend Nick Kuhn from Light Meets Lens, and originally when I shot this photo, I thought I was going to crop it in and get rid of all the bottom because there's no foreground element to it that's interesting, at least when I shot it. But after I shot it with the long exposure and I brought it home, I saw that since I had shot it on a long exposure, all the water was, rippling through the foreground, and it actually looks good. It draws your eye into the waterfall, but I couldn't see that originally because this water was just black. The long exposure brought out all of those ripples and all of that detail that originally wasn't there to the naked eye. For me, I'm still out there shooting photos that I think are going to be amazing. I put a nice foreground element in. I got a nice subject. I've got nice light, but for whatever reason, the photo just doesn't work. And when you bring it back to your computer, you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, well, maybe if I moved over a little bit here and took it from this angle, it would have been more interesting. Or maybe if I waited a couple hours until the sun got real low, then it would have been more interesting. But other times you can just shoot a photo, you just kind of half-handedly take the shot and it looks amazing and you're happy with it. For example, this photo was shot at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I think it was. And originally I wanted to set up this shot on a tripod and take a longer exposure, but if you watch the one video that this photo is from, you'll know that I got stung by a bunch of bees, so I couldn't do that. So I ran over, quickly snapped the photo a bunch of times, and then went back to where I was, sitting, and I was thinking like it might be a good photo, but since I had to do it so fast and so quickly, I couldn't really compose it the way I wanted to because I was going to get stung by bees. It actually turned out quite nice. And, for a photo being super bright as it is, I actually liked the way it turned out. The rocks are a nice foreground element. The waterfall is interesting. And the light that's just peeking over the side kind of balances out the photo because you have this nice, bright, open light and this nice dark area here, and looking directly up the center of the photo, you have balance between the rocks and the waterfall and the light, and I think it just works. You may disagree with me, but like I said at the start of this video, the photography is just so subjective. It's whatever you think is good. All right, I think that's it for today's video. I hope these tips helped you, and I hope you can implement them into your photography. And if you guys enjoy this content, subscribe. I'd love to see you guys back here hanging out in another video. All right, have a good one. Peace.